In June 1943, Corporal Hans Miller stepped off a train in small-town Texas and felt his entire world collapse, not from defeat in battle, but from what he saw through the train window. Every house had electric lights blazing. Every farm had machines. Every worker seemed to own a car. For 3 years, Nazi propaganda had told him America was weak, divided, and failing. Now, as a prisoner of war, he was seeing the truth. Müller was one of nearly 400,000 German prisoners who would experience American captivity during World War II. They arrived as hardened Nazi soldiers. They left as converts to democracy, transformed not by propaganda, but by witnessing something their leaders said was impossible: the unlimited industrial power of a free society. The story began in May 1943, when the Afrika Korps surrendered in Tunisia. Over 250,000 German and Italian soldiers became prisoners. Among them were some of Germany's best troops, veterans who had fought across Europe and North Africa. They expected harsh treatment, maybe even execution. Instead, they found themselves boarding passenger trains with cushioned seats and dining cars. Lieutenant Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote in his diary that first day, "We are riding in trains meant for people, not cattle." The Americans apologized that the air conditioning wasn't working properly. Air conditioning? We didn't even know such things existed outside of Hitler's personal train. As the trains rolled across America, the German prisoners pressed their faces against windows, unable to believe what they were seeing. Every small town was lit up like a Christmas tree. In Germany, blackout rules had banned all lights after dark since 1940. Here, even tiny farming villages had streetlights, neon signs, and houses with electricity in every room. Sergeant Fritz Weber, an electrician from Berlin, calculated that one small American town used more electricity in a single night than his entire district in Berlin used in a week. "They left lights on in empty buildings," he wrote. "They didn't even think about it. It was the carelessness of people who had unlimited power." The trains passed factories that ran 24 hours a day. Through the windows, prisoners could see parking lots filled with workers' cars. In Germany, only the wealthy and Nazi party leaders owned cars. Here, ordinary factory workers drove to work. One guard mentioned casually that many American families owned 2 cars. The prisoners thought he was joking, but nothing prepared them for the camps themselves. Camp Hearn in Texas had been built in just 4 months, yet it had electric lights, hot showers, flush toilets, and steam heat. The camp hospital had X-ray machines and medicines that German civilian hospitals couldn't get. Each barrack had more lumber than entire German villages possessed. Here's something most people don't know. The American camps were so well built that German prisoners actually gained weight during captivity. While German civilians were surviving on 1,200 calories a day, German POWs in America received 3,300 calories daily. They ate fresh meat, white bread, real coffee, eggs, and vegetables. Many hadn't eaten this well since before the war started. Major Kurt Steinbach, captured with the 21st Panzer Division, later admitted, "We threw away more food each day than our families in Germany saw in a month. Not spoiled food, just excess. The Americans required that kitchens prepare 10% extra to ensure everyone got full portions. The surplus was thrown out. I watched them dump perfectly good bread in the garbage while knowing my mother was starving in Hamburg." The prisoners who worked on American farms saw agricultural production that defied belief. A single American farm could produce more food than an entire German county. Combine harvesters did the work of 100 men. Farmers talked casually about throwing away entire crops if prices were too low, something that would have caused riots in Germany. Private Johann Schmidt worked on a farm in Nebraska. He wrote to his family, The farmer's 16-year-old son drives a tractor worth more than our entire village. When I mentioned this, the boy laughed and said it wasn't even a new tractor. His father was waiting for a better model. This is a normal farm here, not some rich estate. What really shocked the German prisoners was American waste. They watched Americans throw away half-eaten steaks, pour out milk that was a day old, and discard fruit with tiny blemishes. This wasn't done to mock the prisoners. Americans simply had so much that waste meant nothing to them. At a soup factory in New Jersey, prisoners watched production lines that processed more tomatoes in one day than German factories handled in a month. Everything was automated. Electric conveyor belts, automatic filling machines, steam cookers. One elderly woman monitored controls that would have required 50 workers in Germany. The most stunning revelation came when prisoners were allowed to read American newspapers. In Nazi Germany, all media was controlled by the state. Here, newspapers criticized the government openly. They published different opinions. They even reported American military defeats honestly. Colonel Friedrich von Stauffen, from an old Prussian military family, wrote, "They hide nothing from their enemies. They show their problems, their arguments, their failures. In Germany, such criticism would mean death. Here, they call it democracy." By late 1943, something strange was happening in the camps. German prisoners were requesting English classes. They wanted to read American books. They formed discussion groups about democracy. Men who had sworn personal oaths to Hitler were writing essays about constitutional government. The transformation accelerated when prisoners went to work in American factories and farms. They saw things that Nazi propaganda said were impossible. Women operating complex machinery. Black workers running advanced equipment. Teenagers managing production lines. All the groups that Nazis considered inferior were helping create the arsenal of democracy. At a power plant near Detroit, prisoners could see across the water to the massive River Rouge complex, where 100,000 workers built tanks, jeeps, and aircraft engines. The plant used more electricity each day than the entire city of Hamburg. The parking lot alone contained more cars than most German cities. Christmas 1943 delivered a psychological blow that many prisoners never recovered from. American churches and civic groups sent 500,000 Christmas packages to German POWs. These were enemy soldiers who had been trying to kill Americans just months earlier. Each package contained cigarettes, candy, soap, and games. Local communities invited prisoners to Christmas dinners. Church choirs sang German Christmas carols for them. Captain Walter Kruger, whose brother had died fighting Americans in Italy, wrote, "They knew we were their enemies. Many had sons fighting our armies. Yet they showed us genuine kindness. What kind of people treat enemies this way? Only those who are so strong they have nothing to fear." The Christmas feast stunned the prisoners. Turkey, ham, potatoes, gravy, vegetables, multiple desserts, ice cream. Quantities of food that Germany hadn't seen since before World War I. The guards explained this was a normal American Christmas dinner, that every American family was eating the same meal. Here's an interesting detail rarely mentioned. Some prisoners were so overwhelmed by the kindness that they broke down crying. They had been told Americans were weak and sentimental. Instead, they discovered that only truly powerful people could afford to be generous to enemies. When D-Day happened on June 6, 1944, German prisoners experienced their final ideological collapse. They watched newsreels showing the invasion's scale. 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the first wave. They saw artificial harbors being built, supply systems delivering 15,000 tons daily across open beaches. Lieutenant Hermann Richter wrote, "We knew then that everything was lost. Not just the war, but everything we had believed. We had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with fairy tales about racial superiority. We sent horses against their trucks, courage against their unlimited resources. The prisoners working on farms during the 1944 harvest saw agricultural production that could feed the world. In Kansas, single farms produced more grain than entire German provinces. Combines harvested 100 acres per day. Grain elevators held more wheat than Germany imported in a year. What broke many prisoners psychologically was seeing Americans destroy food to keep prices stable. Entire orange crops bulldozed into pits because there were too many. Perfect fruit thrown away for minor blemishes. Mountains of potatoes left to rot. This waste proved America had unlimited resources. By early 1945, over 40,000 German prisoners were enrolled in educational programs. They studied English, American history, democracy, and economics. The University of Chicago provided correspondence courses. Stanford sent professors to lecture. These enemies were receiving better education than most Germans got in peacetime. The camps showed Hollywood movies, not propaganda, but regular entertainment. Prisoners watched Gone with the Wind, seeing America's own story of defeat and recovery. They watched The Grapes of Wrath, amazed that Americans would show such self-criticism to enemies. When the concentration camps were liberated in April 1945, the footage was shown to German POWs. Many initially refused to believe it, calling it propaganda. But the evidence was overwhelming. Letters from home confirmed the horrors. Men who had maintained some pride in German honor now faced complete moral collapse. Sergeant Paul Werner wrote, "We thought we were warriors for a noble cause. We discovered we were tools of criminals. The Americans we called weak and decadent showed us what real civilization meant." Between 1945 and 1946, over 370,000 German POWs were sent home. They returned to a destroyed Germany, but brought knowledge of how democracy and industry actually worked. Many became leaders in West Germany's reconstruction. The numbers tell an amazing story. Of 370,000 German prisoners in America, fewer than 1% tried to escape. Post-war surveys showed 95% rated their treatment as good or excellent. Thousands maintained friendships with American families for decades. Here's something fascinating that few people know. Many German POWs actually didn't want to go home. Some had gained 30 or 40 pounds in captivity. They had received medical care, education, and job training. They knew they were returning to starvation and ruins. About 5,000 eventually immigrated back to America in the 1950s. The prisoners had witnessed something that shattered Nazi ideology more effectively than any military defeat. They saw ordinary Americans living better than German aristocracy. They saw workers treated with dignity, producing more than slave labor ever could. They saw diversity and freedom creating strength, not weakness. In 1985, former German POWs held a reunion in Texas. Over 500 returned to America, many bringing their families to show them where their transformation began. Former Corporal Hans Müller, the man who stepped off that train in 1943, had become a successful businessman in democratic West Germany. At the reunion dinner, Müller gave a speech that captured everything. "We came to America as Nazis, believing in racial superiority and conquest. We left as Democrats, understanding that prosperity comes from freedom. America's greatest weapon wasn't its bombs or tanks. It was the simple, overwhelming evidence of what free people could achieve. You didn't defeat us just militarily," he continued. "You showed us our entire worldview was wrong. Every electric light, every full meal, every kind gesture from people whose sons were fighting us? These were arguments against everything we believed. We were converted by prosperity and kindness. The transformation of German POWs in America remains one of history's most successful re-education programs. Without force, without traditional propaganda, America converted hardened Nazis into democratic citizens simply by letting them see American society function. These prisoners returned to Germany as seeds of democracy. They knew Reconstruction was possible because they had seen it work. They applied American farming methods, industrial processes, and democratic ideals. The economic miracle that rebuilt West Germany was partly based on lessons learned in American prison camps. Former Lieutenant Wilhelm Hoffmann, who had marveled at air conditioning on his first train ride, became an engineer who helped rebuild Germany's electrical grid. Before he died in 2003, he said, "America taught us that national strength came not from conquest, but from production. Not from racial purity, but from human dignity. Not from dictatorship, but from democracy." The story of German POWs in America proves that sometimes the greatest victories aren't won on battlefields. They're won by example. America's industrial might didn't just defeat Nazi Germany militarily. It transformed enemy soldiers into future allies by showing them what free societies could achieve. Nearly 400,000 German soldiers entered American prison camps believing in Nazi ideology. They left understanding democracy. They had witnessed the arsenal of democracy at its peak, not just its weapons, but its prosperity, generosity, and confidence. They returned to Germany not as defeated enemies, but as witnesses to a better way of life. The camps that had held them prisoner had actually set them free. Free from the lies they'd been told. Free from the hatred they'd been taught. Free to build a new Germany based on what they'd learned in America. In the end, that transformation may have been America's greatest victory of all.